Good morning, friends. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, Medical Classes by Dr. Srinidhi Kumar Acharya. Don't forget to subscribe my channel and also please give your valuable comments. So, as we know, we are discussing about the developmental history. In the last few classes, we have seen in detail about how to take the history taking. We have seen the vital data, we have seen the main complaints, present history, past history, family history, treatment history, socio-economic history, nutritional history. Okay, so many part of the history taking we have already covered. So today we will have one important history which has to be taken in children, that is developmental history. Now developmental history is very important. Now we have got two terms, one is growth and as well as development. Growth is considered to be the objective parameter, whereas development is a subjective thing. Means growth is an objective phenomena where it can be measured by using different parameters like weight in kgs, height in centimeter, etc. In compared to that, development is considered to be more and more subjective, and we don't have any measurement for that, for which we have to follow different scale. We have got different scales for the measurement of the, or for the assessment of the development. We will discuss those scales in a different class. Now, when you go to take a developmental history, the first thing that you should have is you should have certain instruments which is required for the assessment of the development. It may be some of the playing articles, it may be a pen, or it may be a bangle, or it may be a colored objects, or it may be some pencil, pen, or some other toys, etc. Okay, hanging bells, ringing bells. So these are very important. Now, this is one point. Second one, when you take the developmental history, you have to rely on the mother. Okay, if the mother has got multiple children, so she may remember what happened at what particular month, or she may not remember, or sometimes she may be approximately remembering. So anyhow, we have to rely on mother or other caretaker while you are taking the developmental history. Developmental history is nothing but assessment of the developmental milestones. Now, developmental milestones immediately start immediately after birth, and at a certain target time we expect that this much of development has to take place in a baby, and that will be considered under developmental history, and the same has been called as developmental milestones. In Ayurveda we have got different samskaras which helps to assess the different developmental milestones at a different age or phase of the child. So one thing is you should know the developmental milestones. So developmental milestones are usually divided in so many domains. Okay, so one of the domain is motor domain, which we will call it as gross motor milestones. Another one is fine motor domain, we will call it as fine motor developmental milestones. Another one is social domain, which is where we consider some of the social developmental milestones. Similarly, lingual or language developmental milestones and cognitive developmental milestones. So, understanding these different domains is very important. We have to take the developmental history according to domains. Okay, this is another important thing. Another thing is in the development, first we have to see the normal developmental milestones, and then it should be compared. This has taken as control, and it should be compared with the present developmental state of the child. Now, presently, suppose if the child is developmentally delayed, suppose the neck holding should be there by 3 months, and now the age is 6 months, till the baby is not attained the neck holding, for an example, gross motor milestone. Now, this is considered as a developmental delay. Now, we have to see whether this developmental delay is a static delay, or whether it's a progressive delay, or whether it's a differential development, or whether it's a regression. What I mean to say is, suppose the motor milestone, head control, is delayed by 1 month. Another important gross motor milestone is rolling over. So that is also delayed by 1 month. Okay. And another is the sitting with support. That is also delayed. Instead of 6 months, it is 7 months. Now, 1 month delay is there in all the gross motor developmental milestones. Now, this particular delay is a static delay. Gross motor developmental milestone delay is static. This may be because of the primary or initial injury which has been taken place, as happens in case of birth asphyxia. Sometimes what happens is The neck development, which has to be taken place in the 3rd month, is now in the 4th month it is taken place, and the rolling over, instead of 6 months, it is taken place in the 8th month, and sitting with support, which has to be taken place in 6th month, is now at 10th month. Now what we can observe is the developmental delay is there, but that particular motor developmental delay is progressively increasing. So this suggests an ongoing disease. Already there is an ongoing disease. So this is a second way of assessing the development. Third one is a regression. Sometimes already attained milestones after a particular age of the child may start disappearing or regressing. Up to 10 months, the child was absolutely fine. He is also attempting for walking and standing with the support and doing some of the social activities like tata, bye bye, etc. But unfortunately, after 11th month of age, all is already developed developmental milestones, achieved developmental milestones are start decreasing or regressing. Now we will call it as regression of the milestone. Okay, this is usually suggestive of a degenerative disease. Okay, so this is one thing. Another one is differential development. Differential development means the development is achieved before the expected age of development. This is also not a good news. Suppose the baby is achieving the developmental milestones before the age group expected, it is also not a good news at all. For example, neck holding is expected by 3 months, but child is having neck holding completely by 2 months of age itself, and this may be an early indication of the cerebral palsy because of spasticity of the muscle. Similarly, a child with the Down syndrome may show the social developmental milestones at an early part, but it is not a good news at all. So this is called as differential development. So when you take the developmental history, you have to keep in mind about all these aspects. Number one is domain. Which particular domain is affected? Whether only motor domain is affected, only social domain is affected, only language domain is affected, the diagnosis will going to differ. The only gross motor domain is affected, most commonly seen in case of spastic cerebral palsy. Okay, only social and language developmental milestones are affected, other things are normal, that is most commonly seen in case of autism. When the cognitional developmental milestone is affected, that leads to mental retardation or intellectual disability. Okay, when the social is also good, fine motor is also good, and meantime the development is language is also good, but still he is not able to concentrate the thing, so that suggests towards the ADHD. So like this, we can do the differential diagnosis and diagnosis of the early part itself once we know what actually the domain is affected. So domain-wise developmental history has to be taken. If the only one domain is affected, we will call it a specific developmental delay, and if more than 2 domains are affected, then we will call it as global developmental delay. Okay, global developmental delay. So we need certain tools for the developmental history, that is important. And in the development, we have to also take the development of the intrauterine period, development happening during the intrauterine period, growth and development, that has to be also assessed. One of the best way of assessing the development in the intrauterine period is by means of the weight and also height. And apart from that, very important is head circumference. Okay, microcephaly and macrocephaly, and that gives a very good idea about the insult which is taken place during the intrauterine period. If the child is born with a microcephaly or less head circumference, that suggests that brain growth is not up to the mark. Okay, or there may be some infections or intrauterine growth retardations or nutritional cause, or many things. So these are some of the basic things that I have to identify when you go for the developmental history. Now these are the examples how we have to take that. Now suppose this is a developmental history, and we are now at an examining for the gross motor examination or gross motor milestones. See, first, neck holding expected at 3 months, but it is attained at 1 year. That means too late. Similarly, rolling over expected is at 5 months, attained at 6 months. Sits with support expected at 6 months, but it is attained by 8 months. Sits without support expected at 8 months, it is at 2 years. Stand with the support at the 3 year expected 9 months, but it is attained at 3 years. Stand without support expected at 12 months and not attained at, suppose, in this child of a 2-year-old boy. Now we have to identify the developmental coefficient, DQ. So how to identify the DQ? So DQ is developmental age divided by chronological age into 100. Okay, so developmental age is here 3, and the chronological age is 1 year. Okay, so he developed at 1 year. A chronological age, it should be 3 into 100. If you do, what percentage you get? So that is called as TQ. Okay, developmental age divided by chronological age into 100. So that gives the developmental coefficient. For each and every symptom, you have to calculate the developmental coefficient. Then you have to take average of all the things, and that is called as a developmental coefficient for gross motor development. I think you got the point. Similarly, for the fine motor also, you have to take similarly. Again, you calculate the developmental coefficient DQ, and it also comes at around here 15%. Now this is for the language. Similarly, you take the developmental delay coefficient for language also, that is also 20% in this case, this example. Okay, similarly for the social and adaptive, so where social smile, recognizing the mother, smiles at mirror image, where a big list is there. Accordingly, you have to take and then calculate the developmental DQ. Okay, so now what you have to do is take the average of all these things. Now you can identify here domain wise. Suppose when you are taking some time, what happens? There is a DQ of 15% or 40% in gross motor, and DQ of about 30% in this fine motor, or 20% in this language. But social, there is no DQ. Okay, social, it is normal to the age. So then that means social domain is not affected. Only other 3 are affected. In the other 3 also, which is more affected. Gross motor is more affected than the language. Gross motor is more affected than the fine motor. So this is the accurate developmental history. Okay, so that we can come to a conclusion. These are some of the other examples for the same. So this is this particular pattern has to be followed for the developmental age. It's simply not simply asking that this is not achieved, not achieved, not achieved. So it does not mean anything. So to have some benefit of taking developmental history, you have to calculate the domain wise. Domain wise DQ has to be calculated, developmental coefficient has to be calculated, then it has to be assessed. Then you have to decide it is a specific domain delay or global developmental delay. So then we can come to a particular conclusion. So these are some of the examples. Okay, language. So this is how you have to take the developmental history. Developmental history takes a very important part in the proper history taking in children. Okay, so I hope you understand. And many times while giving the developmental history, mother may not recognize or remember many things. So that time you have to ask some of the easy questions so that she can understand. And approximately most of the time she will give an accurate, almost near accurate answers. Okay. Anyway, so one more important history which has to be asked in children, that is vaccination history. So when I talk about vaccination history, so we have to look into the vaccination at birth. At birth, what are the vaccinations given, and the records. We have to look into the records. Usually vaccination records will be there, and there you have to verify. Then you have to look into the BCG mark to check whether the BCG has been given or not. Then you have to inquire about the pulse polio vaccination which has been given or not, and presently whether they are taking IPV vaccines or not. Then mostly, as there are so many vaccines, the little uneducated mother maybe get confused by the vaccines. So one of the best questions that you can ask, when was the last vaccination given? Because if you ask the vaccination टीका लगाया क्या, so then they say टीका लगा चुका है. Because there are so many vaccines, she don't know which vaccine. So best is to you ask this question, last vaccine आपने कब लगाया? So now child is 2 years and she is telling last vaccine हमने 6 महीने में लगाया था. That means so many vaccines are pending now. As mother is not aware of the factor, so she is not knowing this. So this question will helps to avoid the errors. Okay, when was the last vaccine given? Suppose if it's a 2 years old baby, so last vaccine should be given as a DPT. Okay, booster should be given as the last vaccine, and mother is telling that the last vaccine to हमने 9 महीने में लगाया था. So that means so many vaccines are still pending. Okay, so that is one thing. Any delay, sometime a vaccine may be given late, or sometime you may get the history that vaccine may be given so early. Okay, early vaccination is not good. Of course, late vaccination has got less problems. Now one more important history is in the vaccination adverse reaction. You have to ask whether any adverse reaction after taking the vaccines. Okay, so child developed syncope, child developed some anaphylactic reactions or any allergic reactions, etc., especially for the pertussis and all. So that has to be inquired. Okay, then if there is a 2 or 3 doses are there, like booster dose are there, then all the booster doses were given or not. So that has to be identified. Then you have to also care about the fever at the time of vaccination. Sometime after vaccination, usually in a subacute or mild fever may come, which indicates a very good sign of effective vaccination. And sometime it may lead to fever with seizures and etc. So such history, if it is there, then that has to be asked. Then you have to also see that for this child whether there was any relative or absolute contraindication. For example, usually either in the preterm babies, either it should be 1 month old or the weight should be more than 2 kg. So that is one of the criteria which we are followed. So such any things are there, or whether child has got any absolute contraindication like DPT. There are so many the neurological problems. Okay, progressive neurological problems are one of the contraindications for the DPT vaccine. So like contraindications are there, absolute or relative that you have to identify whether this baby has got such any contraindications. Okay, then many times the parents are confused with the national immunization schedule and as well as IAP schedule. Okay, so they have got some differences. In the IAP schedule we have got so many vaccines. In the national immunization schedule we have got very less vaccines, few vaccines. At least we should ensure that everybody should follow the national immunization schedule, and those who need, they can go for the IAP schedule also. So which particular schedule they are following, that has to be also identified in the vaccination history. Now one more important thing is that is antenatal history. Okay, so antenatal history, then perinatal history, and as well as postnatal history, that we will cover in the next class. Thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe my channel, and also please give your valuable comments.